This is Imagine Air Theater. I'm your host, Terry Phillips. You're about to hear the final episode of a special 4-part miniseries called The Most Dangerous Man. It's co-authored by Roy Schreiber and me. If you have not yet listened to episodes 1, 2, and 3, you should probably do that first. Whether you're a new listener or a regular, welcome to the program, and thanks for joining us. According to the Constitution of the United States, there are very few limits on who can be elected president. A person must be a natural-born citizen, at least 35 years old, a resident in this country for at least 14 years, and, well, that's it. There are no other requirements, qualifications, prerequisites, or restrictions. No necessary education, employment history, or political party affiliation. A convicted felon is theoretically able to hold the nation's highest executive office. A person could even run for president while in prison. But has that ever happened? Stay tuned for the final episode of The Most Dangerous Man. But first, if you like our plays and want to hear more, you can support us by becoming an Imagine Air Theater patron on Patreon. Just visit www.patreon.com/imagineair. I'll have more information about that at the end of this episode. And now, on with the show. In our last episode, American socialist Eugene V. Debs was found guilty of violating the 1917 Espionage Act. That law prohibited inciting insubordination, disloyalty, mutiny, and refusal of duty in the armed forces. A judge has sentenced Debs to 10 years in federal prison.
Furthermore, you shall be permanently stripped of your American citizenship, including the right to vote.
Your Honor, we give notice of our intent to appeal and request a continuance of bail for Mr. Debs.
Granted. We're adjourned.
Debs' lawyers appealed that verdict all the way to the United States Supreme Court. How did the nation's highest judicial body rule? And what did Debs do after that? Find out now in the concluding episode of The Most Dangerous Man. We begin in a Washington, D.C. conference room.
Justice Brandeis, a moment of your time?
Justice Holmes, why so formal?
I'd like to discuss the Debs appeal, Lewis. Preferably in private before voting.
Of course, Oliver. Then let me start by saying this. I think those people in the Justice Department were a bunch of damned fools to haul that man Debs into court.
I agree. Mixing justice and politics is always risky, and even more so during such perilous times as these.
Particularly since Debs himself had been a presidential candidate.
4 times.
High political figures being prosecuted this way. When our nation's founders wrote the Constitution, they obviously did not have this situation in mind.
But since Debs was charged, we do have to follow the law.
Well, that's just it. I think the Espionage Act itself is unconstitutional. It violates the First Amendment.
Freedom of speech?
Precisely.
Well, let me put a hypothetical to you.
Very well.
Suppose some politician, let's say a cabinet member or a vice president, or even a president, gets word that Congress is going to do something he doesn't like.
Perhaps pass a bill that constrains his powers.
A good example. Or one that benefits his political opponents. And suppose this fictitious, we'll say president, were to incite a mob to encircle and lay siege to the Capitol.
Rather extreme, but all right.
Let us further suppose that those people were to rush into the Capitol building and intimidate members of Congress, hold them hostage, shoot and kill them.
That would be quite unlikely, but troubling to be sure.
Troubling? Wouldn't you say that it would be positively criminal, sir?
Probably so.
We'd have to call it an insurrection, and I'd say that a president who provoked that would deserve to be charged.
But one moment. Are you also supposing that by inciting the mob, this president tells those in the crowd what to do?
Not explicitly. Not necessarily, no.
Then I'd say his First Amendment rights would prevail. Otherwise, he's being prosecuted for expressing his views.
And I'd say his words would equate to actions.
Interesting idea.
Now, what if I added to my hypothetical that this were during a time of war?
Do people give up their rights during wartime?
Some, certainly. For example, they may get drafted into the army against their will.
Fine. Then let me rephrase that question. Do they give up the right to oppose the war?
Doesn't that depend on how they go about it?
Forgive me, but I think that war or no war, prosecuting a president or any high government official for what he says would open the door to tyranny.
That is precisely why our court has established a clear and present danger test permitting some restriction of free speech.
Well, Debs's views on everything from capitalism to war are well known. Does his simply expressing those views constitute an illegal action? If so, doesn't that make a mockery of the First Amendment?
Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. People were thrown into jail without trial.
However, our court rightly declared Mr. Lincoln's suspension to be unconstitutional.
Having been a soldier during the Civil War, I greatly appreciated everything President Lincoln did to make my life easier. I was very much relieved when the war against the Confederates ended.
And I am equally happy to say that our recent war in Europe is over.
As I'm sure President Wilson has noticed. I won't be surprised if he pardons Debs and the others.
But for now, Oliver?
For now, Lewis, the law is the law, and regardless of everything else, no man is above the law.
Agreed.
On March 10, 1919, the United States Supreme Court unanimously upheld the conviction of Eugene Debs. He was incarcerated at the Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia.
Now remember, only 10 minutes.
Got it. Thanks.
Ah, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Debs, thank you for agreeing to see me. How are they treating you here?
Better than most prisoners, I suspect. Though I must confess that these dank cells are none too good for my health.
Sir, we have so little time to talk. I hope you won't mind if I'm blunt.
Straight talk is always best. And you've never pulled your punches before. Don't start now.
Fair enough.
What's on your mind?
First, I want to apologize for getting you in here.
Oh, well, let's leave the past in the past, shall we? Surely that is not why you came here.
In fact, I came to ask you a question. I've heard that the Socialist Party wants you to run for president again. What is your reaction to that?
Do you see this number on my shirt? Prisoner 9653. Hardly a suitable moniker for a political candidate.
Prisoner 9653 for president. What a great slogan. We could call it the Jailhouse to the White House campaign. The press release practically writes itself.
Oh, you must be joking. No one would vote for a convicted felon. I probably couldn't even get on the ballot. Besides, how would I speak to my constituents?
As a candidate in seclusion.
A clever idea, I suppose. But as my wife would say, you have your head in the clouds.
Mr. Debs, I've learned a lot over the years about what is possible and what persuades people.
I'll give you that. I know your work. It would still be a long shot at best, though.
I can understand your skepticism, but I'm convinced that this campaign is worthwhile.
You can't believe I'd win, so run to what end?
First of all, it would be for the sake of the Socialist Party. As you know, they are in disarray.
Sadly, that's true.
And no one else has your reputation to unite them, or to attract voters. It could also put pressure on President Wilson to pardon you.
Well, I don't deny that the socialist cause here is in trouble. But force a pardon out of Wilson? Even my friend Clarence Darrow, the most talented lawyer in America, tried and failed to persuade Wilson to pardon me.
Yes, but...
Besides, I wouldn't feel right about accepting a pardon while all of these other folks are still in prison.
Just imagine, if you won the election. As president, you could pardon the others. Anyway, I hope you'll consider it.
Very well. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Mr. Miller.
I'm happy to help in any way I can, sir, to make up for the wrong I've done you.
There are no hard feelings.
Thanks.
But listen, you were very persuasive with me. So, if I did want to run, there is somebody more important who would need to be convinced first.
Yes?
Yes?
Mrs. Debs, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Clyde Miller.
Young man, I remember you very well. You're the one who got my Eugene thrown into prison. What do you want?
I'd just like a minute of your time.
I can't imagine wanting to hear anything you have to say.
You might be surprised, ma'am. I spoke with Mr. Debs a few days ago. That's why I'm here.
Well, I'm a Christian woman, and I don't believe in holding a grudge. Still...
I understand how you feel. May I please come in and explain?
I'm probably going to regret this, but... okay. Come in. Won't you have a seat?
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, so explain.
Mrs. Debs, I'm here to convince you that your husband should run for president.
Run for president? You expect me to believe that? He's locked up in jail.
I know. He still can. There's no law preventing it.
Really? Well, let's say you've got that right. So what? You get to beat all the other newspaper reporters? Be the first one with the announcement?
I'm not a reporter anymore, Mrs. Debs.
Oh? Then what's behind this scheme? You already managed to get him locked up. Isn't that punishment enough?
Ma'am, I made a big mistake pushing the government to prosecute your husband. For that, I'm deeply sorry.
Would you be saying that now if anyone else besides me were here?
Yes, I would. Let me ask you something, ma'am. Do you still get the socialist newspapers? The ones I'm sure Mr. Debs reads?
Yes.
I've written letters to several of them saying I was wrong.
Have you really?
Yes. You'll find my letters in them. Check.
Oh, I will.
I've even written to President Wilson, asking him to pardon Mr. Debs.
Why this change of heart?
First of all, you have to understand, it was never anything personal.
Oh?
You see, ever since the first interview I did with your husband, I came to like him. To admire him, actually.
And I'm just curious. The day after you testified, when you passed by him in court, he said something to you. What was it?
Oh, that. He told me not to feel bad about his lawyer tying me in knots on the witness stand. He knew the lawyer was only doing his job, and I was upholding my principles.
But still, you did help get him convicted, and your testimony was so...
Look, I truly thought he was hurting the country by trying to get soldiers not to fight, but I was mistaken.
And what exactly changed your mind?
I saw how the prosecutors took your husband's words out of context, twisted what he said just to win their case.
That's true.
After the trial, I went over to Europe.
How nice for you.
I was working for the YWCA. I saw what the war had done to all those people on both sides. Grave after grave after grave. Men with no arms, no legs, no faces. Mr. Debs was right. No cause is worth that price.
So what's all that got to do with helping Gene run for president?
I know something about creating publicity that moves people. Right now, I'm working for a company that's trying to help a symphony orchestra in Cleveland.
Get to the point.
The point is, we've got to motivate enough people so that President Wilson will feel pressured into pardoning Mr. Debs.
You think he'll pardon somebody who's running against his party's candidate?
To be honest, I'm not sure. But it's the best way I can think of to persuade Wilson. We've got to keep your husband's name in the papers.
But why?
Now that the war is over, Mr. Debs is more popular than ever. Many people know he was right, and Wilson must be thinking about his own legacy.
His legacy?
Yes, that's something politicians care about, you know.
I suppose so.
But your husband told me that he won't run for president again unless you agree that he should.
I see. The trouble is that Gene wouldn't be campaigning from his prison cell. I would probably be doing it from here in Terre Haute, while my husband is behind bars in Atlanta, hundreds of miles away, and I can't make speeches or answer reporters' questions.
Well, I think I can fix it so that won't happen.
Really? How?
We could hold news conferences with you here, but other people would be doing the talking.
Other people?
Campaign staff. If anyone asks you a question, you'd politely say you're no politician. and they should ask those who have the answers instead. Eventually they'll get the idea and stop pestering you.
That might work. It just might.
Are you willing to have Mr. Debs run? Will you give it a try?
Let me think on it. I'm still not sure I can trust you. I'll need some time to decide. For all I know, you might be working for that government man Hoover.
Yeah.
And I'd find myself in jail just like Gene. But, Mr. Miller...
Yes, ma'am?
If you were telling me the truth, in some ways, you're a better man than the one you're supporting.
Why would you say that?
You're willing to admit when you've got something wrong. He almost never is.
True believers rarely are. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that.
In 1920, the American Socialist Party nominated Eugene V. Debs as its candidate for president. With his wife's support, he ran against Republican Warren G. Harding and Democrat James Cox. Harding won the election in a landslide. But despite being a convicted felon, serving a 10-year sentence, Debs received nearly 1 million votes. The following year, just before Christmas, President Harding commuted Debs' sentence and ordered his release. To this day, it is still a federal crime under the 1917 Espionage Act to interfere with U.S. military operations or to aid America's enemies during wartime. It is also illegal under that same law to retain classified documents without authorization. You've been listening to The Most Dangerous Man on Imaginaire Theater. This special 4-part miniseries was co-authored by Roy Schreiber and me. Episode 4 featured Paul Rogan as Eugene Debs and Louis Brandeis, Tim McCaffrey as Clyde Miller, Stella Valente as Kate Debs, Ted Gray as Seymore Stedman and the prison guard, David Pinion as Oliver Wendell Holmes, and William Jones as Judge Westenhaver. Script consultant Mark Boyce. Casting director Stella Valente. Our theme song comes from Roman Senyk. Other music included America the Beautiful by Robert A. King and Ballard MacDonald, and the Internationale by Pierre Chrétien De Geyter. Imaginaire Theater is made possible by contributions from our listeners. If you like these plays and want to hear more, please support us. Go to patreon.com/Imaginaire. Become a paying member for as little as $1 per month. Again, that's patreon.com/Imaginaire, all one word. We really appreciate your help. I'm Terry Phillips, inviting you to join us again for the next episode of Imaginaire Theater. It's all in your head.